coming along this evening. I feel very honoured to speak to a specialist audience here, which I know shares a lot of understanding and indeed activism on issues that are not necessarily well understood in the broader Australian community. And I see myself now as a popular educator talking to my colleagues who are themselves popular educators about matters of decolonisation in West Asia. And in particular, I would like to say the questions of resistance, because it's talking about resistance that we find the greatest censorship, the greatest ignorance, and the greatest field for popular education, I believe, in our society as we are living in this country now. It's something that's preoccupied me for a long time. It's a worthy case. I think it's the most important task in terms of popular education, that we as colleagues can share ideas and resources on how we do educate the Australian community on the importance of resistance, not just the justification of it, but the right to resistance and the necessity for it, and why it is part and parcel of achieving the rights of self-determination of the peoples of the region. Excluding the colonists, of course. Colonists have no right to self-determination. But you know, Western societies talk about rights a lot, but they are banned typically from talking about resistance. And so I would like also to thank my brothers Haj Hussein Durrani and Hassan Muqtada for suggesting tonight and proposing that I bring along the Arabic versions of this latest book, which was translated by academic Isabella Zaidan in Damascus and published in Damascus. And so with a certain amount of excess baggage on a couple of trips, I managed to bring these copies back here. And the previous two books, you may be aware, were also translated into different languages. All of them are in Arabic now. The Dirty War on Syria, because of the time when it came out about 10 years ago, let me just show you. I don't have physical copies of the Arabic version of these earlier two books, but I do have digital copies here. And I'm going to pass around a list here. If you want a digital copy of The Dirty War on Syria or Axis of Resistance, they're available in English and in Arabic in digital form. So if you leave a contact number there, I can send copies to you. This one, which was written almost 10 years ago, got published in 10 languages because there was a demand, particularly in European countries and some other places, because at that time, of course, as many of you know, there was a huge disinformation war against Syria. And at certain times, propaganda wars mean a lot, you know. At certain times, the physical events that are going on makes that irrelevant in a way. In many respects, the actions of the Axis of Resistance educate people in a much stronger way than any people who write books. I set out with an objective of writing this first book, for example, having given up on the arguments with the fools who were buying into the colour revolution against Syria at the time. But still, I thought there was a need to educate what I thought of as honest and curious people who wanted to know what was going on in this colour revolution in Syria at the time. Of course, this second book really dealt with, in addition to developing more or less, I think I called it Dirty War on Syria Part 2 at the time, because it had a lot to do with Syria and the development of events, but also introduced the question of the future of Palestine, the democratic future of Palestine, the importance of Iran in the region, and the role of Hezbollah. They were the three additional elements there, because the main theme of this book was really that there is a single war going on in West Asia. It's a single war. It all links together. Although the pretexts are sold to unsuspecting audiences separately, you know, there was the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and you know, there was 9/11 in Afghanistan, and there was, you know, in Syria, the government for some reason was bombing its own hospitals and using chemical weapons against civilians, you know, stupid pretexts, but all quite separate in a sense, and keeping them separate, because of course that's been the tactic of empires for so long, to divide and rule, to keep people separate and to make divisions between people who wanted to support Palestine and wouldn't support Syria and so on. So in a sense, there's a single war going on. This is the argument of this book. And the necessity of resistance was the unity of resistance factions. It's something that I learnt myself by studying Latin America and similar
movements that were going on in Latin America for many, many years, and the determination amongst anti-imperialists in Latin America that there was no possibility of facing up to the big powers separately as little groups, as little people. They would be picked off. They had to come together. It was said, there was a great Cuban nationalist in the 19th century who said, we have to form ranks like trees, or like the veins of silver deep in the Andes, so that the giant with the 7-league boots doesn't walk between us. And you see that theme picked up by Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez in Latin America. Over a century of this way of thinking was that the way to defeat the big powers in Latin America was the Spanish Empire, then the North Americans, was to come together, was to form an integrated front in terms of, as with the Axis of Resistance, really the integration of those forces. And now we're seeing, I think, in relation to Gaza, what's been happening in Gaza, extraordinary coordination, still, I think, in its early stages, and still perhaps insufficient in terms of the frustration people feel at what's been going on in Gaza in recent months. But nevertheless, isn't it extraordinary that the revolutionary government in Yemen, which they call rebels for some reason, because according to the Western powers, the government is in Riyadh somewhere, the government of Yemen, are coordinating the resistance in Iraq to attack the port of Haifa and the airfields in occupied Palestine. Now that level of coordination is extraordinary and unexpected, and it was unexpected. Who amongst even us did we think that the Yemen would be able to defeat the British and the North Americans in the Red Sea? You know, to hit them at will and then survive the retaliation there, basically. What frustration the imperialists felt, or the Anglo-Americans felt, because really they're the ones that lead the so-called Western forces there. So really an extraordinary achievement. Still a process of development, but I think people have not widely recognised that yet. And I didn't write about Yemen much until this book, really, either. So the themes of this book, I'll just say something about this because you can read it for yourself. I'll just say something about Palestine, about the economic siege on the region, and about the role of Iran. There's a chapter on Yemen, there's a chapter on Soleimani. I feel very privileged, by the way, to have been able to more or less almost precisely follow in the footsteps of Haj Qasem Soleimani
Allah.
through West Asia, from the south of Lebanon, from Deir ez-Zor in the east of Syria, where I was a couple of hours behind him when I was investigating the massacre of Syrian soldiers in Deir ez-Zor in 2017, and then going to Kiraman a couple of years ago also to visit his grave at that time, not the time when it was bombed this year, but a little bit before that. So it's been an extraordinary experience, and I regard this flag, which some of us put together in Lebanon, as really the Soleimani flag, you know, the Axis flag, basically. It's something that looks forward to the future. The idea of this book, West Asia After Washington, was, of course, first of all, to take the word Middle East, put it in its colonial context, and reintroduce another term. Not that it's for me to decide what people call their regions or alliances, you know, but I've spoken about on a number of occasions in Iran, other places, about the need for a West Asian alliance, whatever it's called. An alliance not just for the purpose of security, but also for the future, the economic integration, the economic future of the region. Because it seems to me, also looking at the experience in Latin America, that economically and breaking the siege that's really imposed on the whole region, you know, from across the Levant to Afghanistan effectively, the siege has been precisely designed to blockade and impose a siege and starve people and make them desperate to rise up against their own governments where they have independent governments, for example. So to me, the integration, the development of blocks, as the Latin Americans have done, they have one called, the major one is called CELAC, you may have heard of, the Community of Latin American Caribbean States. There's another one called the ALBA, which is the Bolivarian Alliance for the peoples of our Americas. They claim the word American. I know in West Asia we say the Americans are what in Latin America is called the United States, is more or less, but nevertheless our America is an old concept in Latin America too. And it's because it's a continent, you know, with 2/3 of the people are not North American, United States is in the Americas, so I'm always conscious of that. But the idea of integration, those blocks now, for example, there's been, when there's some serious destabilisation, like the most recent attempted coup in Bolivia, for example, its cellar in Honduras, as it happened at that time, which was the site of another coup 14 years ago, that is meeting to try and resolve those problems regionally, rather than having North America come in north, because North America is really behind virtually all the coups that happened in Latin America historically, basically, and it may have been behind this recent one in Bolivia too, we don't know yet, but certainly the previous coup in Bolivia in 2019, the US was behind it. Virtually all of the coups and interventions have been orchestrated by the US. You know, there's a saying in the Americas, how is it that there has been no coups in the US? And the answer is there's no US embassy in the US, because the US embassy has been orchestrating these sorts of things. You know, so now we have this monstrosity in Baghdad and monstrosity in Beirut, but you know, isn't it remarkable if you go to Tehran, you won't see a US embassy in Tehran. You will see a museum to the den of spies, and next to it, I think,
we went
it's,
together. When we visit together.
The Imam Mughniya Training Centre next to it, which was the residence of the ambassadors there. You know, so thank you, Islamic Republic of Iran, for some of the examples that you've shown us in that area there. So the point of this book was to try and look a little bit into the future. Not that, you know, people talk about multipolarity now. This is an idea that really came from the Russians in the 90s. It was popularized in Latin America by Hugo Chavez. It's become very popular now because talking about BRICS and the role of BRICS in the region, including in West Asia. I noticed just the other day there's a book by some independent writers called The New Silk Road and West Asia, including West Asia and Africa. And so this is a little bit of a look into